Welcome. We're excited to have you join us today for the latest webinar for the Nightwatch Master Integrator series, a webinar experience designed to level up your security knowledge and integration skills. My name is Unity. I'm the marketing specialist here at Nightwatch, and I will be your Nightwatch host for the day. So you may be wondering, why are we doing this? In today's fast evolving world, staying ahead in security requires expert insights, practical strategies, and real-world solutions. This series is designed to bring you helpful information, best practices, innovations, and actionable tips to enhance your organization's security systems. So without further ado, get ready to learn, engage, and take your experience to the next level. Let's dive in. On today's agenda, we will be partnering with Evolv Technology. There will be a Q&A to follow that is dedicated. There's dedicated time at the end for questions, so we encourage you to use the Q&A function to ask questions that are top of mind for you as we're going through the presentation. Now, I would like to introduce you to our presenting speakers. From Evolv Technology, please welcome Jill Lemond and Jason Grellner. Take it away, Jill and Jason.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us here today. My name is Jill Lemond. I represent our education group at Evolv Technology. So I feel like my job is to take our incredible technology and our solutions and bring it to schools and help them to understand how to best implement, keeping children in mind, right? We're helping to screen children in our schools, and then also keeping teaching and learning top of mind.
And good afternoon. My name is Jason Grellner. I'm our Vice President of Healthcare. So Jill's counterpart on the healthcare vertical. Background in law enforcement, and then Executive Director of Safety and Security for Mercy Healthcare based in St. Louis before joining the team here at Evolv Technologies. So same sort of goal, and that is to keep our incredible healthcare coworkers safe and secure so that they can give the best care possible to you and your loved ones should you need it in a hospital setting. So we're going to start off with Jill today. She's going to get us going down the K-12 track here in education, and then we'll switch over. And then again, at the end, there'll be plenty of time for us to get to your questions and talk with you. So again, June is Gun Violence Awareness Month, and so we're going to let Jill start off talking about gun violence.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I am in the Michigan area, and I was an assistant superintendent in a local school district that experienced a school shooting. This issue of gun violence is particularly close to my heart, and that community, is still very much with me every day when I'm doing this work. That being said, I know many individuals, friends, family, and folks that I've come across throughout my travels in this role have said, what can we do? How do we actually help? What can we do? And so if you have any interest in learning more at evolv.com and using this QR code, there are some very actionable steps and some ways that you can get involved in the fight against gun violence and help in your personal communities. And I encourage you all to do that. And if we can move on, Jason. Yeah, it should come as no surprise that experiencing any kind of shooting, whether it is a mass casualty incident or non-mass shooting, has a very deep and lasting impact on those individuals in that community. And so relatively recently, a study was conducted that looked at both the short and the long-term impact of gun violence exposure in a community. There were over 10,000 individuals who responded to this survey online, and it was in January of last year. I think what is wild, and a number that really gives me pause as a parent of 4 children and a community member, 1/5, 20% of individuals who responded said that there was some sort of mass casualty incident in their communities. Now, that doesn't mean that they personally experienced it, but they had some proximity to an incident that involved a mass casualty shooting. That's 1 in 5 people. 18% had personally been threatened with a firearm. That number was, particularly alarming to me. And actually, between 4 and 5% were injured in a shooting. Again, this is not just mass casualty, but this could be personal violent incidents. Of course, there are mental health consequences, and they looked at which group of individuals were more impacted, what type of gun violence, and then who was actually the most vulnerable and had the longest lasting impact. And I think it was interesting to find that it was women and actually younger individuals, which is where I feel like my role in the schools is so important, right? And the solution taking our solution to schools can be so important. They also found that mass shootings had the greatest psychological distress, like in the moment, episodic and short term, but that the long-term impact of an individual shooting was actually worse. So the non-mass shooting, someone who experienced gun violence, maybe it was domestic violence or some other sort of personal violent incident, that was a longer lasting PTSD response. And these numbers are particularly pertinent in our schools. We're seeing this gun violence in schools. We're seeing how many incidents. I think it's disgusting that there's a ticker out there that has to exist because we have so frequent shootings that are occurring on our campuses. And, a lot of times we see the news, we see mass casualty incidents that make the headlines. And while those are important to study and to better understand, it's much more common and more likely to be a different type of incident, which is a single or small number of individuals hurt. And if any of you are really looking to ruin your day, you can check out the K-12 school shooting database. Excellent data that's been compiled by David Reedman, who is a data statistician, looking at specifically violent incidents in our schools. And as I mentioned, it's not likely to be a mass casualty incident. While that is a number on the rise and that is a concern in our school buildings, something to definitely be aware of, to study and try to protect against, it is much more likely to be an individual dispute. So what do I mean by that? I mean, what would have been in our day going to school a fist fight quickly escalates into a gun violent incident and to some sort of shooting because the weapons are making their way into the buildings. If you look at this data, that's actually the most common incident, that probably that individual student or child did not plan to use a weapon and did not have, sort of a manifesto like we're used to seeing in the mass casualty incidents. But instead, they came into school. Maybe they had the weapon to protect themselves. We've heard that quite a bit on campuses to and from school during that commute. Or maybe they had it to look cool or to scare someone, but they didn't intend to use it. And then they got into some sort of dispute and had the weapon handy. You also see that there are other places on campus where we're seeing these issues. And we're also seeing an increase in drive-by shootings that's on this list and accidental discharges. So again, students who didn't plan to use that weapon had access to that weapon and hurt themselves or others accidentally.
And Jill, I wanted to jump in here. As a former member of law enforcement for almost 30 years, I carried a gun every day. I know your husband is a law enforcement officer. Guns are just part of the tools that we use at work and carry with us every day for use if necessary. A lot of people out there, and I'm a staunch supporter of gun ownership. I think that guns aren't the problem, but I think the problem is that people will invest in a firearm, maybe even train themselves in its use, which I think is highly important. But they really don't take the time to find a way to secure that firearm. It ends up in the corner of a closet. It ends up in the garage. It ends up in a bedroom under a bed, or it ends up somewhere where it can be quickly gotten to. And I think that's part of the problem that we have in today's society. I think you hit the nail on the head. We have kids with high emotion, low intellect, and I say that as a part of their growing experience. Not that they're not smart. It's just part of growing up, and they have easy access to weapons. And so I think that ease in access to weapons and the adults not doing their part in securing those weapons, gives to exactly what you're showing here on the screen, and that is the ability, because of high emotion, low intellect, due to their growth pattern and brains not fully developed until 23, 24 years old, we really as a nation have to do a better job of securing those weapons that we own.
Absolutely, Jason. And so it stands to reason, it's no surprise that our educators and our school professionals are afraid of gun violence, right? When I was in the classroom, I was an English teacher and I was in my classroom. If I heard something in the hallway, some sort of scuffle or some sort of disagreement, my immediate gut reaction, my first thought, whether it was right or wrong, was that it was body on body. It was probably a fist fight or some sort of wrestling between those kids, a couple of adolescents just kind of being knuckleheads out there. Nowadays, teachers are in their classrooms, and I will tell you, because I've spoken to them, I've looked at the gun violence research and many of these different surveys, like the one I'm about to share with you, their first gut reaction is it a gun? Is it a weapon? Where do I hide these kids? Is there an exit? Can we get them all out the window? Should we grab a pair of scissors to fight back? How can we get these desks against the door to barricade? I mean, what a way to go about your professional career in a job where you probably did not choose it with security and safety in mind. There was actually a poll done in the UK of teachers, and they said, what was the number one reason that you went into teaching? And I know it's in the UK, but I imagine it stands, in the US as well. The number one reason was to make a difference. And so most of these people did not go into teaching with the idea of having to be protectors from gun violence. And 59% of the teachers who were surveyed said that they did have some level of concern related to a school shooting on their campus. Again, that's not very surprising to me because it's something that's constantly in the news and something that we're constantly drilling for and aware of because of the rise of gun violence on our campuses and schools. If you look at some of the rest of these numbers, some of them are going about their business being very or extremely worried. We're talking about a high level of anxiety. And the number that I thought was particularly scary is that about a third of the high school teachers that were polled, that's many teachers that were polled. About a third of our high school teachers experienced a gun-related lockdown. That's not a drill. That's not an exercise. That's a gun was in, their classroom, on campus somewhere, or they had reason to suspect or believe it, and they went into a lockdown. Really anxiety provoking, causes a lot of grave concerns for our school leaders. And then they also found that teachers in urban districts felt that they were less adequately prepared. Definitely mental health, and I know Jason has opinions about this, but mental health screening being the number one, issue that the majority of them thought would help that act that way to address the issue.
Yeah, and again, I want to go back to, to our listeners today. You look at these numbers and you look at the weapons that are being used. What can you do as a leader in your community, whether you're joining us today from education or from healthcare or from some other business? What can you do to help get the word out about helping to secure weapons in your community? Unsecured weapons, whether they're being stolen during burglaries or robberies, or unsecured weapons that are being taken by people living in the home or friends who are visiting the home. The number one source of these weapons that are being used. We all hear the stories of weapons that are purchased for individuals who then use them. But a lot of these weapons are being taken from homes. And again, this isn't just school and education shootings or healthcare shootings. A lot of the shootings that are occurring in our neighborhoods are unsecured weapons that weren't purchased. They were stolen or they were taken again during robberies and burglaries. And again, those could have been secured in safes or different places so that they weren't taken. And so what can you do as a leader in your community to help stem gun violence by making sure guns are secured in your community?
And of course, those of us at Evolv are all committed to this mission, which is to make the world a safer and more enjoyable place to live, work, learn, in my case, and play. Very important mission that drives all of us at the company. Now, as you can see, we have many different places that we're trying to protect. Each of these types of environments are nuanced. They have different ways that people access them. They have different policies, bag policies, for example, or what people are allowed to bring into them. And they present different challenges for us as an organization to try and work with these different security teams to understand their environments and to help to better protect them. We are in over 1,200 school buildings across the country. I'm very proud of that number. On any given day, we're screening somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000 students and visitors walking into school campuses. Jason, if you want to just go right on to the next one for me. Thank you.
Sure.
2 billion people, more than 2 billion now, have been screened at Evolv. And on any given day, we're on average screening about 3 million folks walking through our systems. That could be at a ball game, that could be at a theater, that could be at a performing arts venue, that could be at a school or a hospital. And here's some of our representative K-12 customers. I did give you this information, but what I think is important is that we're trying to protect schools that are not only these large urban schools, which we do have many customers, I would say, in that bucket. We're also looking at our rural schools. We're looking at small schools. We're looking at charters and religious affiliated schools. Violence doesn't have a particular profile or a type of community that it tends to erupt in. Unfortunately, it could be anywhere, and this pervasive issue plagues all types of schools across our country. Here are some of our recent wins. I like to focus on the good things that we're doing and the times when we are actually preventing a weapon from doing harm in a school. We just have a quick montage here. And if any of you are interested in speaking with any of these school leaders, we'd be happy to set you up with them. I think it's better a lot of times to speak peer to peer and to understand how they are utilizing our solutions in their environments. Again, every campus, every building being very different within even the same school system. And in schools, we're always looking at this safety balance. So do we want students to feel safe, or do we want them to feel welcome? Do we want our staff to feel safe, or do we want them to feel welcome? And we would argue that we want both, right? And so what is that perfect balance? And it's not just about feeling good, for the sake of it, but feeling good and having a positive school climate does actually lead to a significant decrease in violence. So there is a correlation, it's a strong correlation between the two. People who feel like school is a sanctuary and feel like school is a welcoming environment have a higher likelihood, or I'm sorry, a lower likelihood of having some sort of violent incident and doing
It's the same
violence.
for hospitals, Jill. We balance that same thing, right? Nobody wants to walk into a healthcare setting and be put on edge or feel uncomfortable. And so it's incredible the how synergistic this is. Again, we know that people who feel safe and secure heal better also.
That's a great point. Yeah. And there it is from the School of Nursing, right? We want to facilitate feelings of belongingness. We want kids to feel like they belong in school, not have these sterile environments. And then the other safety balance that I'm frequently met with, and this can be very difficult, these conversations to navigate, but that's our perceptions of safety and the reality of our security on campuses. And you go into a community that has sort of the "it couldn't happen here" mentality. That denial factor is very strong. And I think it's probably self-protective. And you go into that type of community and you say, I'm using this, state recognized or federally recognized assessment tool. And I see that your campuses are, objectively not very safe, right? And that being said, the perception of safety could be off the charts. It couldn't happen here. We know our kids, all these things. And so we're kind of out of whack. The actual level of safety is down here somewhere, and the perception of safety is way up here. And in the reverse, so that the inverse of that are these communities that have experienced gun violence, like the community that I hailed from. And that is where no matter what the reality is, no matter how many, pieces of technology and screening solutions you come with, or AI tools or individuals. We had police on our campuses regularly, thank goodness, after the incident, tons and tons of uniformed officers to try and help with security. That level of safety being very high, again, in a reasonable way, the perception of safety was gone. Once you've lost that perception of safety and you no longer feel safe, it's very difficult to secure those environments and to help people with their emotional safety. And so, again, students' perceptions of safety really do impact the reality of safety on those campuses. After having experienced something like this, you have to think, what can I actually do? I'm watching this webinar. What are my actions? And my answer is, whether you're working for a school district, serving a school district, have children who are attending your school district, or grandchildren attending a school district, you can take action. How often is your board being updated, your school board, on safety items? Is everybody aware of the plan, the emergency operations plan? How often is the public getting access to the metrics that we're studying regarding safety? Are we looking at attendance? Are we looking at violence? Are we looking at weapons found on campuses? And some of these other metrics we should be tracking to try and see how safe are we? Again, in a reality, how safe are we using these objectable measures? When was the last time you looked at board policies and guidelines? These guidelines and policies often exist, and without the training necessary, we don't always know them or know how to enact them appropriately. Post-incident, we were very grateful to work with the National Center for School Safety. My wish for anyone on this call would be to look at these 5 tenets of a school safety plan and our recovery plan and have them be part of a prevention plan. Have them be something that you look at to try and prevent violence in your school community. And so those are the different tenets there. How is your district, addressing those issues? And then how are parents being involved in the conversation? How are the other adults being used? The way that they perceive their school and their attitude towards it impacts their students' abilities to fit in and their feelings of belongingness and how safe they feel, like we talked about a few slides ago. And actually, it helps them decide ultimately where to send their child to school. So do your parents know what's going on? Are they tuned in? Are they advocates for gun violence prevention in your safety in your school community? And, you know, I did form a parent safety committee. It was a really difficult thing to do, especially after a tragedy, because usually the individuals who volunteer for anything in a school district, the parents are either the happiest, you know, the ones who volunteer for everything, or they're the least happy, the ones who have, you know, a bone to pick, so to speak, with the district. But we opened up a fair and open process for members to become a part of this school safety committee, all parents. And I was so grateful for the huge outpouring of just support and energy that they were willing to invest time and expertise into helping us plan in the district post incident. It helped to build that trust with the community when you're inviting in their voices. And what I really learned was we had individuals from law enforcement, from all different walks of life. We had a healthcare administrator, actually, Jason, in our community. We had some people that I didn't know were out there who were absolute experts. And I had to humble myself, and so did my colleagues, and bring those voices in and say, what can we do better? How can we do better? And then the other voice that I think is often left out of the safety conversation is that of children, the students themselves. There are many more of them than there are adults in our school buildings. And usually the kids know, the kids have a pulse. They know what's going on. They know which classmates need some extra help. They know which classmates they might be concerned about. And we have to provide avenues for them to give that feedback, whether that's anonymous reporting systems, which are very important, but then also less anonymous. We chose to, during advisory, have a check-in with students. And we made it very, very quick and simple, but to say, how do you feel about safety? What could we do to better serve you and to make you feel safer in this district? And sometimes it can be difficult to talk to kids about safety, especially based on their age and their level. I personally had, you know, 2 little ones in elementary school and 2 that were in preschool during the shooting, and I mistakenly chose not to talk to them about what happened. Under some idea that I would protect them from that conversation. I didn't want them to know that people could die at school. I just didn't really want to bring that into our household. And shame on me and my husband for not having that conversation early, because as soon as my kids went to their own elementary school in a different neighboring district, they came home with all the same questions and anxieties. Because we are in the age of information, and kids today have access to more information than ever before. And so how can you, as a parent, as a community member, as an educator, guide that conversation with children to make sure that they feel like they have agency and control over their own safety? That's a life skill now. Again, as Jason mentioned earlier, this isn't just happening, this gun violence on school campuses. This is a life skill to know how to avert violence. And I never want to talk about violence prevention without talking about the most important piece in a school, and that is the adults, the people who have signed up because they do want to make a difference, because they care. The 2019 U.S. Secret Service report found that the #1 way to avert a violent incident on your campus is to have a single trusting adult relationship. And so one activity that I encourage school officials to participate in and to implement on their campuses is to print just kind of a grainy picture of every student from your student information system. Doesn't matter that it's in color or anything like that. And put it out, let's just say in the cafeteria or in a large space, just lay out every individual photo of kids. And then give every adult in that exercise, and I don't just want teachers, I would want counselors, I would want administrative assistants, food service workers, our transportation drivers, and give them just garage sale stickers, those little circles, little cheapo stickers for a garage sale. And then you have them go on a walking tour and you say, which kid do you recognize? Which student belongs in this building? You don't have to know their name. You don't have to know their grade, but which kids can you say with some certainty that they belong here? And just give them a sticker and keep walking. And there was recently an exercise done, a study looking at this exercise in professional development, that found that regardless of the type of community they were in, again, rural, urban, suburban, large, small, you name it, there's always some percentage of students, however small, that don't have any stickers. And folks, those are our school shooters. Those are the students who don't feel like they belong, probably because none of the adults know that they do. And I'm not blaming the adults for that, but I'm saying let's be very intentional about making those connections with the understanding that no technology and no, you know, solution can replace the love of an adult to these kids and the care of an adult to these children. There's that study that I was referencing.
We'll wrap up there just for the moment, really, with education, and we'll move over to violence prevention and healthcare. No, it's been a wild, wild world. Um, if I had to answer the studies that Jill was referencing, I'd have to tell you that in around 2013, as I entered a small 600 square foot home, I never heard the rounds going off. To this day, when I remember the incident after 2.5 years of work with a counselor, I still can't hear the rounds. I can see my teammates exiting the building around me. I can still see one of the occupants of the domicile sitting on the couch with a nasal canion and her nightgown. And I can see the rounds as they came through the wall. I remember it was like being in a snow globe. As the rounds came through the wall, they busted through the wallboard, and it looked like it was snowing in the room. And I remember in the chaos of the rounds punching through the wall as the shooter was 2 rooms away with an AK-47. Um, just the awe and devastation and chaos and beauty to me of those rounds and that white snow, and then grabbing the occupant that I could see and shuffling her out of the room as more rounds penetrated the walls in the house. And um, that day was just one of 3 shooting events that I was involved in, and multiple other events that transformed really um, me and the way that I thought about things and saw things, and actually coped and dealt with things until the counseling for PTSD that I was able to get. And so these are transformative moments. And again, whether this is happening to you in a school setting, in a community setting, in a work setting, or in your healthcare setting, they can be very, very transformative. And this year, even more than most, we saw in December with Brian's death in New York City, really an unexplainable situation to me, as we have people like this individual who really believed that the killing of a CEO of one of the largest healthcare insurance systems was right. That there are individuals out there that have raised over $500,000 to support an individual who, although he hasn't been through the entire court system yet, pretty much, blatantly walked up behind somebody and shot them to death on the streets of New York. And there are individuals who are calling for the shootings of people, not because of who they are, not because of what they've done, but because of what they represent. Um, you know, 52 cards. People need to be Luigi'd. And so, again, this emotional response. I told Jill yesterday it was late in my career when I understood emotion and intellect. Again, the brains of most human beings, men and women, being slightly different, women being smarter than men, Jill. Their brains are usually fully developed by the age of 21 or 22, where men are not until 23 or 24. Um, at the age of first use of a narcotic or addictions, we really see the stunting of intellectual growth, which allows emotions to run unchecked. And whenever you have emotion over intellect, and that's what I call it when I speak most of the time, emotion over intellect, and you're acting from an emotional posture, if the outcome is good, it's by accident or by luck. And most often it isn't a good outcome. And you can imagine the younger the individual, the younger the human being, really the less intellect that they've had, the less life experiences that they have, and the less ability they have to control those emotions. And you put that in context with easy access to a weapon, and suddenly you have really a recipe for disaster. And what we've seen through COVID and now post-COVID, especially in the healthcare world, is this linking of healthcare to government, and government's not to be trusted, and now healthcare is not to be trusted. Mass work, no, they don't. Guidelines and visitor management works, no, it doesn't. Sequestering yourself works, no, it doesn't. Inoculations work, no, they don't. And what would have been just an open debate or a way for people to discuss a situation becomes an emotional, ideological response that's really not good for anybody. And now we're also seeing violent extremists, both from outside of our country as well as inside of our country, making threats, as we heard, just a few months ago across this country, identifying healthcare as a target because they know that in any event, no matter where it occurs, healthcare will be involved to dispense healthcare that's needed during a mass event. And so targeting healthcare is also becoming more and more a part of what we're hearing in the intelligence world. We know that, basically there's three forms of violence in healthcare. There's effective, predatory, and defensive. Defensive violence, is the violence that somebody takes to stop violence. Violence is simple physics, right? In physics, we know to stop any force, there must be an equal or greater force if we want to stop that force. And the same is true with violence. If you want to stop violence, you have to have the same or greater violence to stop that violence. And that's what defensive violence is. So as we go through the next few slides and you see defensive violence, know that that is people defending themselves or others from effective or predatory violence. And then inside those effective and predatory violences, we have, how the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim is. And that can be criminal intent. We see that on outside of the building quite a bit, when people are stealing vehicles, when they're stealing from vehicles, when they're robbing individuals. We saw kidnapping occur on one healthcare campus last year. So we see those criminal intent. Customer client, those are effective violence. Those are the ones that we hear about most often and that really upset our healthcare coworkers. Coworker on coworker violence, this can take many different forms. It can take the forms of interpersonal violence when we have hospital love, right? When the nutrition services coworker falls in love with the supply chain coworker, or the doctor falls in love with the nurse. Or it can be the fact that we have two rival gangs in a neighborhood, and members of those gangs are working in different sections of our healthcare campus, as we've seen at some of our clients' locations. And then personal relationships. And this is probably the scariest, and as you'll see as we move forward, probably the leading indicator and leading cause of gun violence on healthcare campuses is interpersonal relationships. And that can be, again, between our coworkers. It can be a coworker and a paramour, or it can be a guest or a patient in a paramour. So when we look at the location of occurrence of shootings on healthcare campuses, we're all worried about this inpatient unit. And that really only makes up about 18%. Not that that should be overlooked, but when you're looking at the greater area, 32% parking lots and parking garages. Then we have our grounds outside the ED, our grounds in public. You had another 15% to that. And now we're approaching 50% of the shootings that occur on hospital campuses actually happen outside of the building itself. So ED, inpatient units, outpatient units, non-patient care areas, so hallways and things like that, and indoor public areas, so your waiting rooms and different places like that make up the bulk of the inpatient shooting areas. Obviously missing from here, and I think we do a very good job, is our behavioral health units. And I think we do a lot of screening of individuals moving into behavioral health inpatient units to make sure that they don't have weapons with them. Although I would tell you in the case of Mercy Healthcare that I work for, it was the precipitating factor into us moving into weapon screening devices, as a weapon did make it into our lockdown behavioral health unit. When you look at who's perpetrating the crime, and we're looking at the perpetrator and the victim, personal relationship is 35%, coworker on coworker 6%, and again, some of those are interpersonal relationships. So well over a third of those, criminal intent. So again, stealings, robberies, sexual assaults, kidnappings. And again, I'm going to tell you that many of these criminal intent could be interpersonal relationship. But look at this, 70%, 74, 75% of these are not customer client related. And so as healthcare professionals, we really need to broaden our view. Right now, we are so honed in on our customer and client violence which, don't get me wrong, is bad. Hands, feet, mouth, the way that they're degrading our coworkers is horrible. But when we look at gun violence and what's killing our coworkers, seriously injuring our coworkers, 75% of that is not customer or client. And we really need to take a step back, look at the numbers, and see where that's at. And when you look again at those types of violence, defensive 11%, effective 34%, but predatory and targeted is 50, almost 50%. And again, this comes down to, when we go back to that previous slide, looking at those interpersonal relationships. And I'm going to talk a lot about that because it hits close to home. When I think about the incidents that occurred at Mercy while I was there and before I was there, it's these interpersonal, also, previously known as domestic violence incidents that are occurring, that follow the coworkers to work. Incidents where coworkers are shot, stabbed repeatedly, and killed are these interpersonal relationships. And so I talk a lot about in my trainings what we can do in the healthcare field to really bring this to light. We work with a lot of incredibly educated individuals, and nurses and techs and clinicians and doctors and surgeons. And they find themselves at times socially and interpersonally in relationships that are not healthy. And they feel as though that they have done something wrong, and that they are in the wrong and don't want to bring that forward. And they don't want to talk about it at work. They don't want to, they feel bad about it. They feel like they can't talk about it at work, and it follows them to work. And when it follows them to work, it doesn't just harm them, it harms everybody around them. As we saw, Mercy, Chicago, the individual with intent to kill his paramour ended up shooting 5 other individuals on the way during that shooting. And so these interpersonal relationships, although targeted, have a way of spreading on the campus to other individuals. And there's a lot of indicators, from where we are at a normal, healthy baseline to an attack, with some sort of a precipitating event. And again, this can be as easy as a breakup of 2 individuals who are dating to a divorce or the dissolution of a marriage. The ideation and then we go to planning and then preparation. Along this way, there's usually leakage of their intent, whether it's through social media or to a loved one or to letters that they're writing. Somewhere along the way, there is some sort of leakage, or maybe it's that the victim has finally had enough and they've gone and they've gotten a court order in the form of an ex parte order or a full order of protection. And what are we doing to make sure through our HR, and whether this is, again, in a healthcare setting or maybe it's in a school setting? Look, teachers are not immune, and administrators are not immune to this interpersonal violence. And what are we doing to support them, to make sure that they're reporting? Look, in an ex parte or a full order of protection, the petitioner has to put down their address where they're living as well as where they're working, because the respondent, the suspect, is not allowed to go to either of those locations. Well, if they're naming our place of business, whether it's a healthcare facility or a school or a warehouse or an office building, in a court order, we really should know about that, so that we can support them, so that we can protect them, and we can do everything that we can to keep that violence from showing up on our campuses.
Jason, if I can just jump in, when we're talking about that leakage too, on the school campus, I talked about anonymous reporting systems. So I know in Michigan we have OK #2 say, and you can call that hotline and it's 24/7 and say, I've become aware of something on social media. I've become aware of a concerning behavior. That's completely anonymous. And I think that's important for kids to know. A lot of times our students hear or see something, particularly, again, I'm going to say on social media, and they don't know what to do with it, right? And nobody wants to be the person who rats out a classmate. But what systems do you have in place in your state or in your place of business that allow others to report potential issues without any kind of, having to identify themselves? I think it's really important.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, Jill. Having an outlet somewhere you feel safe and somewhere you can stay anonymous but get that information out. We learned that after 9/11, right? We had all these silos of intelligence across the United States that kept us from really seeing the full picture of what was going to happen and what ultimately did happen on 9/11. I talked a lot earlier while you were talking, Jill, about securing firearms, and we know that that doesn't happen across the U.S. And again, time after time after time, burglary reports, one of the main things stolen is firearms. And so if we know that firearms are making their way into our communities, into the hands of individuals who don't have the emotional or intellectual balance to handle them, or to individuals with criminal intent, this is where Evolv can start to help to put up a barrier to help you keep those weapons from entering into areas where we don't want weapons. Education, kids should always feel safe. And I use the word kids, on up to individuals on college campuses that should feel safe. And in a healing environment, that's what we want. We want people to feel safe. Look, a hospital, if you've never thought about it this way, is the only place that I know of where you will go to bed and leave your door open and unlocked. I dare you to try that at home tonight. I dare you to do that the next time you're in a hotel room. Just leave your door open to the hallway when you go to bed in a hotel. We do that in a hospital. And so a hospital needs to be one of the most secure and safe places to give healing to our patients, and to give a sense of safety and security, not only to our patients, but to our guests and their relatives who are, leaving there that night, knowing that they're going to bed with their bedroom door open and with the front door of the house unlocked. And so, our Evolv Express units do a great job in both education and healthcare of forming a barrier that doesn't look like a normal metal detector, gray metal box that you're going through at the airport or as you're going through into a penal correction facility. But really help to give a warm and welcoming response, because people move through at the pace of life. And then a very easy, readable screen for our operators. This isn't trying to guess what's on the x-ray or try to figure out why it's beeping and where on the body. We superimpose on a video, like no one else in the business, a box that indicates where on the person walking through the system believes it's found the weapon's signature, leading to a justified and dignified conversation, most of the time without really even having to put hands on people or property. Again, I want to hit on Domestic Violence Month is every October, but coming up this October. And really we need in healthcare to identify interpersonal domestic violence as a social healthcare need. It's what brings people to our EDs as victims. It is what is plaguing many of our own coworkers. And so my challenge to you listening today, either from education or from healthcare, is what are you doing about interpersonal violence, and how are you working to help bring it out of the shadows, draw back the curtain, and make it a healthcare need that has to be looked after in our communities. And what are you doing to protect your coworkers from interpersonal and domestic violence each day when they come to work, so that that violence doesn't follow them to your campus and become an incident on your campus? And Jill, I know you guys have been working with a bunch of students from across the U.S. On a program known as Zero Now.
Yeah. And so, this problem can seem so big and so overwhelming that no one knows really where to start. And I would encourage anyone who's interested to check out Zero Now. It's a nonprofit group that was really formed to get to zero school shootings today. It actually was rooted in students who really had a call for action. I was going to just play this quick video so you can hear from some of those students.
I can't be protected by hopes and prayers.
I won't use hope towards what's next. I'll make my own way.
I know impossible is an opinion.
I won't wait for safer schools. I want to create them.
I don't want to be afraid anymore.
I refuse to be a victim.
I'm just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
And so they do have a student community
can't
within
be-
Zero now. And they also have this think tank, which is for the broader community. So again, I know we have individuals from many different types of businesses and different walks of life that are on this webinar right now. There is space for anyone and everyone who has constructive comments to give to this community and ideas to share. It's for individuals to try and get together and really, without any politics or without any personal agendas, to think about how we can have safer schools. And we have a path to safer schools. So that is this mindset that no matter where you're at today, you could take another step forward. No matter how secure your campus is, or in the cases of some of these other individuals who haven't begun their journey of locking doors and perimeter fencing and some of the other best practices in our buildings and our campuses, there is a place to start, and we can make it into digestible, small, actionable steps. And there's also a council of school safety directors. So that's a new group that's been formed. And those are individuals typically with law enforcement or other types of security background who've come back to the schools to help and to help direct their safety efforts. And I think it's an incredible network of individuals trying to make change. And I would encourage you to check it out.
Yeah, and I would just say that, Jill and I are coming to the conclusion here of this. We both do a lot of speaking engagements across the country. Jill, obviously, for education, and myself for healthcare. And we really do dig and dive a lot deeper into these. We talk about other AI capabilities that are out there. What we don't do is we don't do really a commercial for Evolv technology. We talk about from our backgrounds and our past, those things that are working best, things like trauma-informed care that are great in a healthcare setting and can also be very helpful. And that's violence assessment tools that can be used both in healthcare and education, and different tools that are out there. So we're always open, to talk with anyone in these fields about what they can do to help make their campuses safer. We're never going to make anything safe. Look, if we could control violence, there would be no need for any of this, right? If we knew how to control violence all the way back to Cain and Abel, then we wouldn't need law enforcement. We wouldn't need laws. We wouldn't need any of these AI platforms or anything else. But we don't. We don't know how to predict violence very well. Through our best efforts, we don't know when violence is going to occur. And we don't know what motivates some individuals, as we just saw, this weekend in Minnesota and Minneapolis. And so violence is been a part of our society for as long as we can remember in recorded history. And so we have to find ways to deal with it. We have to find ways to mitigate it. And Jill and I are always there to work with you to help you find ways to mitigate your violence and to make your campuses safer. So with that, Jill, I think we're going back to our friends at Night Watch and see if there's any questions we can answer. Unity?
Thank you both for the insights you provided on gun violence, especially in the education and healthcare industry. I really appreciate it. The first question is, what role will data, AI, or emerging technologies play in advancing human performance in the schools and healthcare industry?
That's fantastic. Wow. Yeah,
that's a loaded question. Big question.
Yeah,
take your time answering. No pressure.
I'm sure Jason has a lot to say. I'm just going to kick it off with this idea that we can't be everywhere. And so I've seen some really incredible technologies that are helping to, for example, filter students' access to the web. It's looking at what kind of websites they're accessing. It's using AI and algorithms to look at what sort of information they're creating. So as students are emailing themselves back and forth or using school platforms, looking for concerning words and concerning language. That's one way that I've seen recently that it has made a big impact. We actually were able to stop a suicide that was about to take place because of a technology called Gaggle that we were using in the school system I was in. And that flagged a student conversation between two students, and a student did have a plan, and we were able to get local law enforcement there. That's one tool. Obviously, we're looking at weapons detection, which I'm guessing Jason will dive deeper into with his expertise, and we're seeing that. But I just think this idea, like, our educators are being asked to do so much. And we've heard that from as long as I can remember, and certainly longer than that, I'm sure, that as we get all of these new testing things that are coming out and new curricular things that are coming out, and we saw during COVID when we closed our schools, our educational professionals are providing a heck of a lot more than curriculum to kids. They're feeding them, they're transporting them. The CPS individuals who are reporting violence against children, that went unreported, so much unreported during COVID, because the teachers are really the caregivers to those kids during the school day. They don't always have time to do the other things. And so I think that when it comes to safety and security, I think AI is just a force multiplier, and finding which resources and which tools can have eyes and ears on students in other ways so that the people can refocus on the people things, the things that are not replaceable, which is what I talked about, those relationships.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think what I like to say in healthcare security is that AI is there to supplement and augment human beings. It will never replace human beings, that human interaction. But, at Mercy Healthcare, I had 900 buildings with 7,500 cameras. If anybody on the line today believes that I had individuals sitting and watching 7,500 cameras to help identify things that were happening in the now, you're crazy, right? There was just no way. Cameras were there to memorialize things that had happened so that we could go back afterwards and watch them happen. But we couldn't do any predictive analysis with them. We couldn't do any prevention with them that you can do now. In today's world, when we looked at just one hospital, 437 acts of violence in the ED, we found that 27%, over 130 of those incidents, were done by 12 individuals. And through facial identification software, we knew when those individuals entered our ED, and we could have an alternative form of care for them, not a worse form of care, but a form of care for them that kept mitigating the situation. It kept de-escalating the situation, because if I could de-escalate 12 people and secure 27% of my violent incidents, I was a hero. And we still were able to give those 12 people the care that they needed and wanted from us. And I found out that out of those 12, 8 were on lists at other healthcare institutions in our area as being violent. Things like weapon screening at your doorways. And, Jill and I also talk a lot about weapon screening away from your doorway in the open. We know that individuals who are marching towards a school are already armed, right? They don't secret a firearm into the school, then take it out and start utilizing them. A lot of times they start outside the building, as we saw in Nashville, Jill, and march towards the building or Sandy Hook with the weapon already out. And so there are now AI packages out there for your cameras looking for weapons in the clear. So there are looking at your access control and who's utilizing your access control, and are people piggybacking through your access control? Are teachers being nice and holding the door open for 3 other individuals that they may or may not know, thinking that they're being warm and welcoming, and we're losing control of our access control? So there's a lot of different AI out there in the security world that has opened up to us even in the last 5 years that we didn't have the potential for utilizing before. And I know Unity, you all at Night Watch know a lot about that. You can help integrate that in a lot of circumstances through access control, video management, through panic alarms and distress alarms. That you guys have a lot of individuals that you work with in that world.
Yes, we do. Thank you both. Those were great responses. My second and final question is, how has the landscape changed in the past 5 years? Jill, you kind of touched on this a little bit, from physical fights to how that has now escalated to today, and kind of where do you see that going?
Yeah, in addition to the physical fights, changing into gun violent incidents, something else that's happening is that we're actually asking our schools and a lot of communities to start monitoring student social media. And so that's a much bigger conversation and quite a debate in the school community. But there's a big question of, is the school responsible, or should the school have some responsibility to know what's going on between students outside of school hours? And so I guess I would just say that the school day, what is a school day, is very blurred. The school campus and where, when are the educators and educational professionals responsible for students and students' well-being, has become very blurry and has changed over time, again, with technology and all the different advancements. we look at, it's not up right now, but some of the other violence information, we're seeing a lot of shootings and a lot of violent incidents after school hours, like in the parking lots. We're seeing them at events in the stadiums and other places. And so our schools have not really had to think very much about those instances and those circumstances before. And they're very, very difficult times and locations to help protect. I hear a lot of schools that are asking us for solutions for school buses. So we're seeing a lot of increase in fights on the school bus to and from school. And how do we help to monitor students before they get there? So like I'm saying, this idea that school is one place and during certain hours has sort of changed. A lot of our schools serve as community buildings. And so I'll go into a district where they're, locked up and doing everything just by the book and to the letter during the school day. And then 3:30 or 4 o'clock hits and it's an open campus. Well, as a parent and as a community member, I love that. But as a security specialist, it's like, how are we keeping that building safe? And what can we do to make sure that everyone has this sort of culture of awareness that we're talking about? So if you see something, you say something, and you notice disturbing behavior outside of the school day. That's been a big change, I think, for schools.
Definitely. Thank you. And then Jason, is there anything that you wanted to talk on that, just kind of how the landscape has changed and where you see it going for the future?
Yeah, we touched on it again. I can talk for hours about how things have changed post-COVID for healthcare, right? The trust eroded during the ideology. Look, in healthcare, we always work with the human animal, and many of us of an older age, such as myself, not like you and Jill, were told when we were young, look, if an animal is struck by a car, don't go near it. Out of pain and fear, it can lash out and bite you or hurt you, right? Get an adult, let them deal with it. Well, the first thing that happens when somebody comes into the ED with a pain or a problem is we poke and we prod, right? And human beings also can lash out from pain, from anxiety, and from fear. And that's what we see. Look, when I was dating my wife, I never said on a Friday night, hey, let's go to the ED. That'll be a fun place to hang out. And we'll get something from the cafeteria and we'll watch people come and go from the ED. It's not a fun place, right? People are there in fear, pain, and anxiety. And so we were used to that. And that's where that long-standing, it's just part of doing the job came from. But post-COVID, it's not like that anymore. It's ideological. It's hateful, right? It's hate speech. It's lashing out because you don't believe the same way that I do. I told you to give me ivermectin. I know it's for horses and veterinary use only, but I heard on the web that you can use it to treat COVID, and I want you to inject me with ivermectin or whatever else Google Doc has told you is the best way to handle your ailment. And you want to argue about your treatment now with individuals who've spent 8, 10, 12 years going to school because somebody on the internet told you there's a better way to do it. And so these sorts of arguments we're not used to in healthcare. Again, we're used to individuals acting out, again, from fear, anxiety, and pain. What we're not used to and what we shouldn't have to put up with. You came to us in fear, anxiety, and pain. We're going to do the best we possibly can to treat you. We're not here to argue with you. If you don't believe this is the best treatment, please feel free to find treatment elsewhere. And you can. There are lots of places to find your treatment. But this ideological battle that we're fighting now, that's something we're not used to in healthcare. And that's what's erupting into the most violent incidents, along with, as you heard me talk long and wide about, interpersonal, right? We know that 70%, 50% of these interactions that are super violent, utilizing weapons, are occurring on our campus in an interpersonal relationship. And so if we follow the numbers, which is something I did to keep myself alive throughout my entire law enforcement career, then we know that interpersonal relationships are what's causing some of the most devastating incidents on our campus, and we need to get a handle on that.
Thank you both so much. And thank you all to the attendees for joining today's webinar. A special thank you again to both of you, Jill and Jason, for joining us to share valuable information on building a culture of awareness, readiness, and resilience. We really appreciate you both being here and also sharing a little bit of your personal stories and how that ties into where you are in your profession. We hope you found the session informative and helpful for future decision making. And with that, thank you so much for joining us for the webinar today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week.